Build creative confidence. Beat the inspiration addiction. Join the Writer's Gym. One of my favourite moments interviewing Dr. Kim Fleet last week, and possibly one of my favourite moments of the podcast in general, was when Kim told the story of a ritual that has helped her in her life as a freelance writer. It's called jumping up and down on a rejection. And as a student, Kim physically jumped up and down on a copy of something that had been rejected. And what it made her realise, not necessarily in words, but in her body and soul, is it's not about pretending the feelings aren't there. It's not about, as regular listeners will have often heard me say, locking the feelings in a box and sweating while we lean on the box to say these feelings aren't there and they have absolutely no power to upset me. And all of that sweat and all of that energy can instead go into letting the lid off and accepting that the feelings hurt, but they can't harm. They are a natural and healthy part of human experience. So she did the jumping up and down on the physical rejection, and she kept doing that into her career as a novelist, short story writer, non-fiction writer, and all of the other incredible things that you will have heard Kim has done. I love how physical that example is, but something else I loved was that as we continued to talk about it, and to talk about how creativity and anxiety work. So the what-if circuitry that does its what-if stories and can create stories that we know are stories, or can create stories that we actually think are objective reality, which is what anxiety does. It makes you think that the bad things that could happen are very sensibly going to, and you don't realise that you're just doing your creative writing wearing another hat called anxiety. So we were talking about creativity and anxiety. And Kim mentioned that one of the things that does concern her is that as an 80-year-old, she may have to turn up in A&E having injured herself and say, I was jumping on my rejected manuscript. And what I said to Kim about that was, that sounds like a really good example of success, not only as a freelance writer, but as a human being in general. Given the way people I know have turned up in A&E, and some of those stories are, while very funny, far too gross and painful for me to put here in case anybody doesn't like hearing about what goes wrong when you use a blender while drunk, for example. Hi, Ali. Then, you know, it's probably more than you need on here. So what I said to her was, that's actually an example of somebody being 80 years old, having started as a freelance writer way, way, way younger than she and I are now, and carrying on, and it being part of your life for all that time. And I cannot think of a better example of success than doing something you love and continuing to do it. Now, yes, as a dyspraxic, I will not be physically jumping up and down on manuscripts because I will be injuring myself today if I do that, but I certainly have my own rituals. And so what this got me thinking is, the crazier or stranger something might seem to somebody else, the more of a character trait it is, the more interesting it is, the more we think, why does that work for you? And what can we learn about you in that? Now, with Kim's trait, that physicalization of it and the ability to both accept the feeling but also accept the humour in the situation, to go beyond the ego to the truth of what am I trying to achieve here and how can I take it forward and do it. I love that as a character trait. I didn't say that to her at the time, although I hope she's listening and hears how much I love it now. What I did say to her though was, Kim, please make this anxiety anecdote, this fear anecdote, a short story, because we talked about how Kim works with her short stories and novels, and I would love to see this form part of a short story. But not just for Kim. I thought, what about me? And what about you listening to this? What are the fears that our brains might be writing about our future? I have one about an escalator, because I'm not an enormous fan of down escalators. I have to stand on the right and I have to hold on to them. I am not going to be running down the left-hand side. I'm going to be holding on to the right and keeping the stories my brain is writing in check as best I can. In fact, it goes deeper than that. in order to step onto the down escalators when they're really scary down escalators. And for anyone interested, I can tell you what makes a scary down escalator another time. But let's just take it as read for now. What I do is I put somebody I love at the bottom in my head, and I put something I really want to get away from behind me. And I use my anxiety to get myself onto the escalator rather than, for fear of getting onto it, not be able to get onto it as I used to do. So I might actually imagine there's a fire behind me, or I might just imagine that somebody I don't like is behind me and that somebody I love very much and want to see is at the bottom. And sometimes I'll do it for somebody else. I will create that story in my head that I'm getting onto this escalator for someone else. Now, if I weren't telling you about this out loud, this would probably just carry on living in my head, and I wouldn't think anything of it particularly because it is just life as I know it. But I bet you've got a story too. I bet for every person listening to my escalator story, or Kim's jumping up and down on the manuscript story who's going, I bet you've got a ha as well. I'm going to invite you this week to sit with your and maybe fictionalize it. Maybe give it to a character who has a few spoonfuls of you, but isn't completely you. Can be different to you in any details that you choose them to be. And I'm not a betting person, but if I were, I'd be betting you any money that that is going to be a really, really interesting story to write. Because in fictionalizing something quite as personal as a hurt or a fear, we learn about what we care about, not just what we don't want. So that is my creative I dare you for this week. Take an anxiety story that your brain has written and give it to a character and see what you learn about the protagonist in the fiction and the protagonist out here doing the living. You've visited the Writer's Gym with author and coach Dr Rachel Knightley. Production and sound design are by Ashley Lexine, and theme music is by Chris Gregory.